You know, what I try to pay attention to, Karen, is what is the tendermost part of my heart that is seeking voice or expression. And what's at the heart of this inquiry for me is how do any of us take what is invisible, what is intangible, what is unseen, yet we see something, we know something, we believe something, and how then do we take that thing that's invisible or intangible and give it form and shape so that others can receive the gift of what we see or what we have to offer. And
you're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Alrighty. Look a beautiful lipstick on. Hello, how are you all today? You're with Karen, accentuating the positive here on Soul Traveller Radio. And I have the most delicious Chocosaurus. I can't even remember. So I always ask people, how do you want me to introduce you? And Michael said, as the most delicious Chocosaurus Rex. So I have the most, is that right?
Something like that.
Look, total chocoholic.
Yeah.
Let me get serious. So we have with us today the fabulous Michael Margolis, who is the founder of Get Storied, a business that helps, well, anyone really, but he goes into businesses and helps get their story straight. You know, like, why are you in business? What's the story, man? Anyway, it's all very delicious and we're going to talk about it today. But first, I'm going to quiz him about his own personal journey. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hi, how are you, sweetie?
Very good. So I met Michael online, a year or so ago. Actually, a friend of mine, Mary Vanderveer, told me about Michael, who's another fabulous, look, she has a radio show and she also helps people do personal branding, and she's an artist and she's delicious. She said, check out this guy, it's really good. So I looked online and I thought, I like what this guy's saying. I like it. Anyway, so a year later, he's looking to come to Australia. Say Australia with an American accent. We love it. God.
I'm here in Melbourne.
He's here in Melbourne when he says it with a very Australian accent. And we connected and he stayed with me and he's been on this amazing journey throughout down under New Zealand and Australia. He's been on a bit of a shaman's journey, actually. So, Michael, let's start from the beginning. I know you've been interviewed by many people and your story's online, but I'm going to quiz you again. How did Get Storied be born? How was it born in you?
Well, I used to suck at telling my story. And, it comes from a lot of different places. I grew up, a bit of a misfit kid. I was a nerd long before it was cool to be a nerd. Do you remember those days? And,
yeah.
Right? We had no idea better days were coming. We just knew that life really sucked. And I was, not only was I a nerd, but I was this weird kid that had, grown up in Switzerland till the age of 9 and then moved to Los Angeles, California. So you can imagine Swiss lederhosen boy and surfer skater culture. And I was chubby and awkward and my little, leather booties. I was a train wreck and I couldn't play sports to save my life. And so I just experienced at this really young age this sense of being a fish out of water, of being lost in translation. And, it took me many years to realize how much that experience in many ways has defined the arc of the rest of my life. And, and if we fast forward to, the sort of beginning of my career, I came of age at the birth of the internet age. So I graduated from uni in the late 1990s. I was living in Boston at the time. And I got involved as an entrepreneur, but specifically a social entrepreneur. So applying, business principles to social change issues. And had a lot of very quick early success. Was working on digital divide issues, which is, the very idea that technology will increasingly influence like the haves and the have-nots, what career opportunities you have, what economic opportunities you have, what social connectiveness you have. And so we were working on digital divide issues back in the late 1990s of how urban inner city adults could get into high-tech jobs. But the story everybody wanted to tell was the story of saving the inner city. Poor Leroy grew up, with a crack. His mom used to smoke crack. His dad's in and out of jail. But look at how technology is the silver bullet that will save the inner city. And that story just made me want to throw up in my mouth.
Why?
What's that?
Why?
Why? Because it's, we have these stories that are condescending stories, that are stories that are, I'm fascinated with the issue of innovation, social innovation, business innovation. That's what our specialty is at Get Storied, and how you use storytelling to bring something that's new and disruptive and world-changing to life. And usually when you're working on something like, say, digital divide issue, it's about poverty, it's about race, and ethnicity. And the current story of how we talk about that is very condescending, it's patronizing. It actually perpetuates the very thing you're trying to change, which is a sense of equality, right? And so I saw in that instance, we had a lot of very quick success. By the age of 23, I was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, and had a lot of great support for this work. And then by the age of 24, epic crash and burn, startup failure.
I want to get back to that. I want to ask you this question because this question's burning inside me.
Oh, let's light a match.
How did you define your success?
How did I define my success then?
Mm-hmm. And how do you define it now?
I mean, look, I'm not really one that's good at defining success at any time in my life, to be honest with you. I'm telling you a story, and the story is back in late 90s, by a lot of external measures, we had a lot of very quick success. We had, it's very rare and unusual for a startup nonprofit less than a year old to get that type of funding from such leading iconic foundations. And we were incubated by a venture philanthropy firm, and I was in Fast Company magazine, and we organized a whole digital workforce alliance of basically training programs on the ground doing this work, and so a lot of things that were like very quick. But at the end of the day, we were in the intermediary business. We weren't in the direct service delivery. We weren't doing this on the ground, and so then, as well as now, I have a hard time answering the question of success because it's not my story. When I work with, we work with Google, we work with NASA, we work with Deloitte, we work with Greenpeace. It's not my story. It's your story. I may be a midwife for it. I may be an educator that's helping you to locate yourself in that story and tell a better story for the future you want to create. But I don't own those results. And I'm more interested, frankly, in a culture of inquiry than a culture of achievement. So yeah, it's a hard one. I never answer that question very well. About what are you most proud of in your career? Yeah, I mean, I can tell you plenty of things that other people will go, ooh, wow, isn't that cool? But
here's what I think.
I don't really cling to it. Yeah.
So where do I start? I think that a lot of us are looking for success in this money thing. We're looking to be big and famous and successful, and the more customers we have and the more revenue that comes in, that's going to define success. But a lot of people that get that, and especially people that get that very early, realize that's not what they're looking for. But yet we go out there and strive to make that happen. And then, some people never make it happen and some people make it happen. But a lot of the people that actually make it happen kind of go, that actually wasn't what I was striving for. There's something else that I'm looking for. What is that? And that's the journey, you know, and that therein lies the journey that we all take, that sense of fulfillment and purpose and reason for being. And so I like to have that conversation inside business, because we can get so caught up in the striving for the success inside the business. And I get caught up with it all the time in my business. And I have to stop and say, look, why am I doing this? You know, who am I and why am I doing it? And, you know, this whole radio gig is not a paid thing. So I'm not looking for that financial success inside this. So that why am I doing it? I question every day, because there's not the money behind it. But it's an interesting question to ask yourself in anything you do. So why do you do what you do?
You know, what I try to pay attention to, Karen, is what is the tendermost part of my heart that is seeking voice or expression. And what's at the heart of this inquiry for me is how do any of us take what is invisible, what is intangible, what is unseen, yet we see something, we know something, we believe something, and how then do we take that thing that's invisible or intangible and give it form and shape, so that others can receive the gift of what we see or what we have to offer? And that's really what propels me. And you know, and it's what's at the heart of anybody who's an innovator or a change agent at a deep core level. That's what we're trying to do. And to your point about measuring success, you know, one of the challenges when you're not driven by financial success, first and foremost, and you're working on something that's really big, something that is, you might not see all the fruits of your labor in the most immediate, direct, explicit manner. You know, it's so from that place, you know, when you don't have those immediate feedback mechanisms, it becomes really easy to define oneself, to define one's success actually in the struggle.
Wow. Yeah.
Because look, I mean, I'm look at this resistance. Oh, I'm working hard. I'm at the gym. I am pumping iron of effort. So that becomes our feedback mechanism.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm just sort of looking at, you know, social activists and entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. You know, the story of the struggle becomes their drive. Save the trees, save the planet, save the. At the same time, the story of the struggle doesn't allow the expansion of the solution.
If your identity is so attached to the story of struggle, you know, is there ever the possibility of reaching the promised land? Is there ever the possibility of a respite? Is there ever the ability to just be okay with what is, and to celebrate the harvest? You know, to acknowledge the bounty. You know, the Buddhists have a great proverb that I really love. It's one of my favorite touchstones, which is, enough is still a feast.
Enough is still a feast. Well, yeah, you know, it's about being happy in the moment, okay with the moment, acceptance of the moment. I was just listening this morning to someone online talking about the death of her partner and how everyone saw that as such a tragedy, but inside the tragedy so much growth came out of it. And you know, the story of the struggle of death, grief, all that sort of thing. But out of that came huge expansion, huge innovation. So the struggle is the step one process, the asking, and then the acceptance is the allowing, and then life brings you the solutions, the desire fulfilled, the dream fulfilled. Okay. Back to your story. So you were terrible at telling your story.
Yeah.
How did you get better?
Well, or so I felt, you know. I mean, By the way, my lighting battery just went out here. I'm just going to make a little swap out as we're talking. But so ask me the question again.
You said before that you
Yep.
felt that you were not good at telling your story. Because I really relate to this. I had a whole lot of marketing people and brand you. When you work for yourself and you put yourself out,
Yes.
you're your brand.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that will relate to my story. So I work as I started off my life as a naturopath, massage, then it went into healing, then it went into teaching. But I'm the product, right? Now that is a personal growth journey on its own, being the product that you're selling, because oh my God, your ego gets in the way of that. But telling your story so that it doesn't look like you're telling everyone how fabulous you are and you're an egoic son of a bee, and you're telling your story in a way that's going to contribute to, therein lies a skill that you help people with.
Yeah.
Do you want me? Oh, you're back online. Do you want me to stop and I can...
Yeah, I'm with you. No, I'm tracking. I'm just ta-da! Some light back. Sorry about that. So, I mean, here's the thing, right? The act of having to tell so first of all, the hardest story to tell is always our own. Always, and with that, it brings up every insecurity, every vulnerability, every self-doubt. And, a lot of us who are professional service advisors, healers, consultants, coaches, we're really good at making the story about everybody but ourselves. Oh, no, it's not about me. No, I'm here to serve you. Don't worry about me. You hear this in the psychotherapy sort of traditions, and this, I don't want any projection. No, my story. But here's what you got to remember. If you have no story, I don't know how to be in relationship with you. Right. So it's we actually, I need to know your story before I can trust you with mine. And so, this is a really big issue for so many of us, where many of us are in careers and professions that first of all, that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. Right. So we're in careers and professions that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. And then we're often building worlds or providing services or trying to share something with people that we couldn't have conceived of 10 or 20 years ago. And so this is the state that so many of us are in, where the old stories of how the world worked and how we understood those things don't really hold true in the same way. And so many of us are now inventing the future or bringing forward, you mentioned being a healer. There might be some deep esoteric body of work that used to be really closed sacred knowledge, and now you're bringing that out into the world. How do we translate that, make that accessible? Our same issues as a CEO has with some business transformation initiative, and how this new technology platform inside our company is going to change the culture for how we do business, and having more transparency and better understanding of what's happening and how we collaborate and communicate. And all. So, that translation process, helping people to locate themselves in the new story, is really the ultimate task of any leader or entrepreneur or change agent. And, I think you asked me another question of how did I get better at it? Honestly, it's just by grabbing a tiger by the tail. So after that first chapter as a social entrepreneur, I hit the wall. I had a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual breakdown. I was so sick that, I could barely walk. I took a 6-month-long sabbatical. I already was into a lot of different sort of things, but definitely turbocharged my own sort of spiritual path. I lived at a place called Kripalu in America. That's like the largest holistic health yoga center in the U.S. Cool. And a lot of seeds were planted there. But I remember coming out of that experience, and then eventually I sort of found my sea legs a little bit. I was now living in Washington, D.C. And after a little while, I hung out my shingle. I was like, all right, I'm going to get back in the game. And I want to get into organizational change. I think that's the ticket, right? Because that's what had failed in my last startup, were these organizational change issues, these systemic change issues. So this is what I was fascinated with. So I hung out my shovel as an organizational change consultant. And the first 6 months in business, I brought in this much income.
I can relate to that.
Nada, zilch. People didn't know what the heck to make of me. I'm here. I was at the 23-year-old young blood talking about all of this, transformation and innovation and organizational change in a place like Washington, D.C., and it's like 2002. Okay, didn't quite go so well. But, oftentimes the big stories of our lives, this is something Robert Moss says, drawing from the Aborigines. And he says, the Aborigines, the big stories of our lives, they stalk us. They follow us like a hunter stalks its prey. And so it's there all along, like following us. And so what happened for me, based on serendipity, a friend invites me to a meeting, not that kind of a meeting, instead of a meeting meeting. It sounds like, Alcoholics Anonymous or something, right?
Oh.
But she invites me to this meeting that is a community of organizational storytellers called Gold Fleece.
Gold Fleece.
And Golden Fleece.
Golden Fleece.
Like, yeah, it's a name off of Jason and the Argonauts in Greek mythology, which basically they're on the journey for the Holy Grail. Rather fitting, right? Mm-hmm. So here I show up in this room full of this motley crew of organizational storytellers who start talking about this craft, this bubbling up, young, emerging field, which in 2002 was very early. But a guy from the World Bank by the name of Steve Denning had been given the assignment of knowledge management and sort of leading that up at the World Bank, which was sort of a suicide mission when it was handed to him. But he found a way to bring it to life, and he realized the power of storytelling as a way to unlock knowledge in the digital age. So he very quickly became a best-selling author and poster boy for the organizational storytelling world. So he started throwing conferences at the Smithsonian, and this community emerged. And here I walk in, and most of these folks in the room are like in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I'm the 23-year-old youngblood. And I just sat at their feet, and I soaked it all in, and I also then sort of interpreted it. I took it in through the lens of my generation and my work as a social entrepreneur. And in that, within that community was Paul Costello, who was my first teacher in the world of storytelling, who is a seminary dropout, former social activist, trained in the tradition of narrative therapy, Michael White, who's actually from Australia, from Adelaide. And he taught me about living stories, about the ethic of narrative, and about hermeneutics. And that sort of cracked the egg open for me. And then, the last 15 years, it's been a humble path.
Look, it's been a humble path, but it hasn't been boring, I would imagine. Look, the ethic, there was a few gems that you said just then, living stories.
Yes.
We're all a walking, living story. There is nothing but story. Hollywood understands this so well, the power of story. And, my humble path as a teacher healer came to that conclusion when I came across some spiritual teacher healer that just sat and told a whole lot of stories. And it hit me in the head that healing is really about a new story, and translating a message is about telling a story. It's not about do this, do that, step 1, step 2, step 3, And I realized, having never been religious, that the Bible is actually a whole book of stories. And the bestseller on the planet, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking,
yes,
success and story, they're very much intertwined.
Every wisdom tradition has been passed on through the storytelling tradition.
I want to ask you, I'm going to come back to your story in a minute. I want to ask you about creatives. We talked about healers and esoteric. I'm just thinking of a lot of people that I deal with that are incredible creatives. They're music, they're singers, songwriters, artists. They're these, and they they're not into their story. They're into their art. They're into their music. They're into their whatever they produce. You know what I'm saying? And they're not really that good at even talking about themselves. They want their art to talk for itself. What do you say to these people who have produced, let's say, music? They've produced a song, an album, and they want the world to hear it, but they're not proficient at they want the music to speak for itself. In the past, Michael, that's been the paradigm, in that the music did speak for itself, and the musician, I'm thinking about Prince, who just left the planet recently, has been very reclusive, and we don't hear their stories. We hear their craft, but we don't hear their stories.
Yeah. So, the shortest distance between two people is a story. And, Howard Rheingold has said, thanks to the internet, life is increasingly performance art.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges that we face with that is, we're all on stage.
We're all
in the
on
Truman
stage.
Show. We're all in the Truman Show.
Yeah.
And in an age of information overload and attention deficit, what we're looking for are those invisible lines of connection of who moves us. And we don't always have the benefit of introducing ourselves to people through our art, especially now in an age where so much creative content. Our expectation is we expect a freemium model. I expect a whole bunch of free version of your art, and if I really love it and you give me a really compelling value proposition, maybe, just maybe, I must pay for it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so, this notion of what are all the different ways that you build the emotional connective tissue with your audience, with your community, with your tribe. And it's and for a lot of us, it's like, here's one of the challenges I think the artist, the creative, change agent, or entrepreneur faces at a very archetypal level, okay, which is most of us, our identity is usually formed out of rebellion. Our identity, this is classic adolescence. Like, we start from the place of, I am not. I am not that. I am not my parents' this. I am not my community's that. Right? So we define ourselves in opposition. And that's what sets us off on the quest, to go off on our epic, heroic, journey out into the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And in a certain regard, for that's the fire that we're forged in. But you see, that experience of I am not actually becomes the barrier to the return, or to making it back home, right? To coming back to the world, because I don't know why I'm having some blinkies here. What's going on?
Oh, that's just your inner being. That's just your inner being blinking at you.
That's so strange.
That's just the universe.
This
saying,
light's not supposed to flash back and forth. Oh my goodness.
It's liking what you're saying. No, you're actually hitting something on the head. Yeah. You're hitting something very personal to me, right on the head. So keep going. So the story of the I am not is actually, it gets you out into the world to say, who are you and what's it all about, Alfie? But it actually inhibits you from coming back home. That is just so beautifully put. At some stage, you have to let go of the I am not and embrace it to actually get back home. That's every adolescent, rebellious adolescent child's story. That was me, and that is my daughter right now, actually. So how do people let go of the I am not and come back home? How do they do that?
Yeah. Well, this is something I've been spending a lot of time looking at lately, which is, see, the story of I am not is a story that's deeply rooted in our suffering, right? It's rooted in the, wait, this is it? This is all we get? That was my experience, right? This was my, look, when I was 5 years old, when you were 5 years old, you were the world's greatest storyteller, right? Most of us were. Then what happens?
I don't know
what happens after that?
I don't know what happens.
We went to school.
Oh, we went to school. Oh my God.
We went to school, right? In school, we were told what the right stories were.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, like, to me, that experience was like getting a bunch of hand-me-down clothes that don't fit. Because I would go home, my dad's a mad scientist and inventor. My mom's a teacher, artist, and toy designer. So imagine, we've got Doc Brown from Back to the Future. That's my dad. And my mom's like Mary Poppins. And I don't know if, every day my day it's going to be a science experiment or an art project. And then I'd go to school. This is it? Right? So that experience of, and just like, and we all have, like, pile it on, each of our own personal version of suffering, of pain, of the disappointments, of the way we're told how the world works, and then how our experience lines up to this. And so that is actually what often propels us on the quest, right? Sometimes, now some of us have had a really blessed childhood or early life, and we're taught a certain set of values or outlook, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is my responsibility. I must be a steward of this teaching and a wisdom. So sometimes it comes that way too, but for so many of us, we're rooted in that experience of rejection, that experience of us rejecting the world because we in some way feel rejected. So we have to get in touch with that, because while it's the grist for the mill that sets us off on the quest, it's what even, in a heroic journey will get you to the top of the mountain, right? So many of us, have had that moment, of illumination, of truth descended, of finding that philosopher's stone, or, I've got this breakthrough. Now, I'm ready to bring this back to the tribe, to the world. And, well, the hero's journey doesn't end at the top of the mountain, right? There's a whole second half to that story, which gets overlooked. It's the long walk home. It's how we make our way back down the mountain into the valley the river flows, and we come sprinting back to the village. We're like expecting a hero's welcome return, but wait, there's nobody here to greet me. Where's the ticker tape parade? Wait, and then you finally, you track some people down in the village and didn't even notice you were gone. Or if they did, they're like, well, where the hell have you been? And then you're like, oh, but I was just at the mountaintop. I've got this amazing thing. Wait till I tell you about this technology and what can do. Oh, well, listen to you and your fancy buzzwords. Right? And then, like, our exaltation, our ode to life, it's like, and we experience that same moment of rejection, right, all over again. And we usually come back, right, with our message. Oh, I've got the gospel. I've got this truth. I've got this breakthrough to save humanity. It can make such a contribution. But we usually then tell the story inadvertently that says, don't take this the wrong way or anything, but you're all wrong. But don't worry, I'm right. I'm right. And, blessed be, I've come back from the mountaintop with the tablets. I'm going to set us straight. Don't worry, we'll take care of everything now. Oh, no, but I don't mean I didn't mean to take this personally. No, you're not wrong, bad, or stupid. No. But the old way of doing things is pretty screwed up. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Right?
So what you're saying is, when you reach your epiphany, how do you communicate that with somebody without making them wrong? By validating who they are, but showing them a new way of being. I mean, really, wow. That's, yeah. I remember, about 25 years ago, I discovered Law of Attraction, read all these books, and I used to tell everyone how they were a victim. You're a victim. You're a victim. They did not like that at all.
that didn't make you many friends, did it?
They did not. People used to tell me to shut up a lot. Shut up with your spiritual crap, how do you translate what you know? You look, the only way I know how to translate what I know is to live it personally. Because in my own living of it, I have my story, and I can tell people, this is how I experienced it. This is what I felt. This is what I did. This is what I thought, and to translate how to teach someone to think, I have to express how I've thought. And that was for me, that was a journey.
Yep. So building on that, this is something I just finished a 12-week teaching tour that's been in not only across Australia and New Zealand, but North America as well, where I was teaching like 2 to 3 times a week, new audiences and new venues each time, which it's just like being in the dojo. And I just finished this last Saturday, and now for the next month, I'm just harvesting and synthesizing and sort of building the next generation for one of our core curriculums, the Lean Story methodology, which is, storytelling for innovation. But I've been looking at this closely, and one of the things that I think is at the heart of what you're speaking to is part of this is learning and being able to witness ourselves in our own suffering, and to be able to then let go of the suffering. But if we can't witness ourselves in our own suffering, then we're going to have a gosh darn hard time to witness anybody else in their suffering. And I find that's the thing we tend to skip over.
Wow.
It's the bypass that happens again and again with change agents and entrepreneurs and healers and so on.
You're saying something so important right now, and I just want to reiterate it.
Yeah.
It's not only the witnessing, because, my personal life is just giving me the tools for what we're talking about, as always, synchronicity.
Yeah.
It's not only the witnessing your own suffering, but detaching from it too. Like, I'm just suffering over my suffering. Like, I'm in my suffering, but knowing that, at the moment I'm suffering, but I won't be suffering, witnessing it and detaching from it. It's not, because what we do in our suffering is we're in the now and we're in the moment, and we think it's going to last forever. The depression, the tears, the pain is not tomorrow or the next moment. And when you witness it and accept it for what it is, it very quickly leaves, and you can see the desire birthed from the suffering. You can see the new idea that has been born within the suffering, and the reaching for that. And that's what you do for another as a healer or an entrepreneur. You see their suffering, but you're not attached to it. You're not identified with it. You've been there. You can be empathic. You can say, that feels shit. I know how that feels. I was there yesterday. But you're not identifying with it being who they are, because you see the innovation born from it, and you can see where they're going, and you can lock on to that.
That's exactly right.
Whether it be the health in the body, or the money in the bank account, or the lover, or the enlightenment, or the love from within. Yeah.
Well, we all teach what we need to learn most.
What is it that you need to learn most?
How to honor the wisdom of my heart, and that for me, I'd rather be judged and remembered for the presence of my being than the doing of my mind.
Say that again.
I'd rather be remembered for the presence of my being than the doing of my mind.
Beautiful. Something that I witnessed in you, which I witness in myself, is that juxtaposition between the mind and the heart. The mind that wants to analyze, think, invent, criticize, pinpoint, that delicious mind. It's such a seductive tool, the mind. And the heart that just wants to be and accept and love in the moment. How do you find you juggle those two strong elements?
The journey for me is one about learning how to witness myself more deeply, and in that process, being able to witness others more deeply. Sharing more of my personal story. I mean, I'm the story guy, and I still, oh God, I don't want to share my story. Everybody wants to hear that. And I've, even in the last couple of months, there's a lot more that I share. And it's not from a place of ego identification in it. It's from that place of, and this is the question we all have to ask ourselves, am I sharing this story for my own ego validation, or am I sharing this story in service to my audience as an educator, so that they're able to relate more easily, that they're able to understand the underlying motivations of where I'm coming from, including my biases, including my own frailty, my own lacks, my own blind spots, right? Like we all have internal biases, and when you can be more transparent about your motivations of where you're coming from, that's a huge part of creating a receptive field. And then, the place that I think I'm still sitting in right now is, I went nomad almost a year ago. So I'm a global nomad now. I live out of 2 small little bags, that fit on carry-on. Karen, you can vouch for this. You've seen me in my 2 little bags, right? And I live and teach around the world. And there's so much to that journey that we could talk for hours on. But there's a piece to it, which is I'm more into, and I'm designed to serve the moment, just personality-wise. I'm really built to serve the moment, and I'm more about serving that moment than wanting to capture or produce an artifact of that moment. Because people are always like, oh, well, gosh, are you blogging a lot? Are you doing lots of content about this? And no. But should you? Well, I know it'd be good for show business and could be, but you know what? Here's, I think, the crux of the matter for a lot of us. You know how I talked about taking what's invisible, what's unseen, what's ephemeral? There are aspects of those areas of our life. Some of it is sacred knowledge. Some of it is actually not meant to be shared. Or it's meant to be shared with only our truest intimates. So the idea that everything is to be shared is a false sort of pendulum swing. And of course, a lot of us then see oversharing happening through social media. We're like, oh my God, I so don't want to be that wanker. Oh my God, please don't let me ever sound like her. And then we pull back and we don't share anything at all. And so, to me, there's a middle path to this, right? And that's the journey of how we story ourselves into being, and how we discover the invisible lines of connection that help shape and bring to life ultimately the meaning of our life, right? What actually, so I mentioned, remember I mentioned that thing about the feast, right? So one of my challenges in life is that, my life is like, I sit at the all-you-can-eat buffet of life. My life is such a feast of experiences, of remarkable people and organizations that I work with. And yet the paradox is I continue to have to work really hard, despite my life being a feast, that I don't feel nourished. So what is it about that interface between the feast and feeling truly nourished? And part of my conclusion around that, it's, this same thing that happens when you go to the all-you-can-eat buffet and you're like, oh my God, all right, I'm gonna have a plate full of the shrimp cocktail, and then wow, check out these chicken wings. Oh wow, and there's a pot roast, and oh wow, you guys have edamame. Oh wow, and I can get my own custom stir fry, and it's like plate after plate all stacked up, and it sounded great at the time, much less once you get to the dessert buffet and you try. Oh, but there's 25 different things. I got to taste every single one. Oh, I wonder what that one's like. And then 20 minutes later, you're sitting there going, oh, what was I thinking? Oh. And I think that's a parable for what a lot of us are going through right now in this time and age, where you can so much more than ever be anything you want to be, that you can create or build a world unlike any time before, that you can take an idea and bring it to life, and then all the incoming streams of information and ideas that we're processing. And no wonder so many of us don't know which way is up or down or left or right, much less feeling nourished. So that's been meditation lately.
There's a very, very good reason for not feeling nourished, and and it's perfect and exactly as it should be. Just like, to use your analogy, when we eat and we're as full, it's like we can eat as much as we can stuff in our gob, but it's not going to satisfy us for the rest of our life, because at some point, again, we'll be hungry. And that's the balance of life, because I think when the hunger stops, life stops. You know, when you're full, when you've had enough of life, when you feel completely nourished, there's no more there's no more desire in you. There's no more movement forward. I don't think life is about sitting back on the couch feeling completely satisfied with what is. I think that hunger and reaching for that more nourishment keeps us moving forward. And I think, desire is always born, the next desire. Like, what next? What next? What next? Who can I meet next? What story can I, get out of someone next? What interview can I do next? Next client. Next.
I don't think that's mutually exclusive from nourishment.
You don't think it's mutually exclusive from nourishment?
No, I think you can see, like one of my mantras is, or something I've sat with before is, I have everything that I need, and I want more.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Yeah,
but you see, I have everything I need is feeling nourished. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to still have desire for other things.
Yeah,
and but I think this issue of nourishment actually is, to me, the crux of a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. It's the crux of coming back to self, and how easy it is for myself and many of us to live a life reacting, and increasingly reacting to an infinite number of demands or requests for our attention, versus how much time we're spending creating. Based on our dharma, based on our calling, based on what are we really seeking to bring forward, versus all the responsibilities or obligations that we think, whether they're true or not, of all the places that we give our energy away. So that's something that's very real and present for me, even still.
And it's perfect. And it's delicious. And it's like chocolate.
Did somebody say chocolate? Chocolate? Ooh. Chocolate? You want some chocolate?
Yeah, give me some chocolate. Thank you.
There you go. All right, I'll have it for you.
Ah, dear. Look, we've nutted out a few things today. So your journey as a nomad and being, homeless. You said to me, while you were staying with me, that you wanted to feel at home wherever you are, and that was a part of being, nomadic. Do you feel like you want to still continue that? Have you reached that point of feeling at home wherever you are, or do you still crave some sort of home? How's it going?
Being a nomad was the dream deferred for 20 years.
Yeah.
And, as someone who teaches transformational storytelling, I mean, the archetype of the traveling bard, is quite appropriate. Or as someone who's been on a, spiritual path, for many years, the sort of a modern sannyasi, like a certain aspect of renunciating, of emptying the cup, of letting go of a lot of things to live a simpler life. And in a way, living off of the generosity and friendship of those you meet on the road, has been a really phenomenal just platform for growth for me. It's been I'm loving it. I'm very happy in it, and yet at the same time too, I'll tell you, I couldn't have done it any time sooner. Yeah. So for 20 years, I've wanted to do this. If I'd tried it a year earlier or 5 years earlier, I feel like it would have chewed me up and spat me out. Mm-hmm. And there were just a convergence of forces, in terms of my own spiritual practice, my own professional development, a bunch of different things converging, so that no matter where I am in the world, I'm able to hold my center, and I know how to create a sense of home. So it's actually been